Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for bearing with me for the reset and for the weird long chant. How'd you like the weird long chant? We've been doing it 3 times a day for the past couple of days. So that text, that chant that we did in Japanese called Jijiu Zammai, which translates in this version it's translated into self-fulfilling samadhi, and in the translation that I grew up with, we call it the self-receiving and employing samadhi, which is longer. Maybe a more thorough translation. It's very hard to, Chinese is very terse. And a lot of times when we're talking about Japanese titles, because it's, when we're talking about Buddhism, when we're talking about the Japanese of most old Buddhist texts, we're actually talking about classical Chinese. Because it's kind of the language of liturgy and the language of exposition in early Japanese Buddhism. It's kind of like Latin in Catholicism. Yeah. Anyway, but Chinese is incredible because you have one little blip that means so much. So sometimes we're looking at a text that's been translated into English and it's so long, and then when you look at the Chinese, you're like, holy moly, that's like 16 characters or something like that, because it's just like very terse. And there's just myriad images and pictures built into every word. So this Jijiu Zammai, that Zammai is actually a phonetic rendering of the term Samadhi, which is Sanskrit term. Has anybody heard the Sanskrit term Samadhi before? It means, usually in the yogic and early Buddhist traditions, Samadhi means something like absorption or single-pointed concentration. And the way we use it in Zen ain't quite that. The way we use it in Zen means like a settledness. So it's a bit more broad. Because I don't know if you've encountered this in the way that you've been taught to meditate in the Zen tradition. If you have been taught to meditate in the Zen tradition, we don't talk about concentration that much. Sometimes we talk about using the breath or the physical posture as a touchstone, but we're not really telling you to just really seize upon an object unwaveringly. And I'm going to talk about why that's so. And kind of the vibe of this school. Because there's a lot of Buddhisms, and they have they're from the same, they share like a great 92 times grandparent, but they've all gone to all these different cultures and been meshed with all different kinds of ideas and evolved, and so they're all kind of doing their own thing. So there's some commonalities between them, but also there's big distinctions between them. So to be aware that when you take one up, that you're doing kind of like a type of Buddhism that has its own kind of playbook, and similar to this is a repeat for some of the people that have been here for the session, but I just started I'm new to going to doctors. I spent my 20s and 30s not really having to go to doctors. So now I go to the doctor and they're like, you've got super high cholesterol, and your family has super high cholesterol, and you're predetermined. Your heart's basically designed to destruct it at age 50. And they're like, so you need what do you eat? And I'm like, well, I kind of follow every diet. When I want meat, then I'm keto, and then when I want bread, I'm vegetarian. And it's like, yeah, you can't follow all of them. Because then there's no parameters. So to take that in mind when you're trying to do a meditative tradition, because then you can be kind of not moving through kind of a single framework. And I'm one that's big on cross training. I think there's a lot. I think Buddhism has been oddly, the counter side of that is that Buddhism and the yogic traditions have been oddly kind of dismembered from each other, because everybody's kind of developing their brand. So that brand is kind of we do this and we don't do that. But if we understand if we really understand the different positions of the different schools, then we can have a sense of what advice is worth taking, what advice doesn't quite match what we're trying to do, you know. So sometimes in my path of learning, I come across this stuff about absorption states, and you know, so in Pali they call them jhanas, and I'm like, gosh, I wanna do that. That sounds great, you know. And they're like, well, really, you need at least 3 months to just be alone and basically do this morning to night every day for 3 months. And I'm like, yeah, who the hell does that? You know, and in Asia, monastics do that, and in the U.S., rich white people do that. I'm neither of those things. And sometimes I listen to like interviews with like teachers in the insight tradition that talk about, well, I try to do a 3-month retreat every year, and when I was 17, I went here and there, and I'm just like, that's a different life than mine. I was working at Macy's for $6.50 an hour, you know. And then when you go to live at a Zen monastery, you gotta, Zen monasteries are still like 70% labor, you know. So it's kind of a retreat, like 6 months of the year, depending on where you live, you know. But there's still work every day. Day without work's day without food, they say. Anyway, so samadhi means like a settledness. So this question of like, so what is the settledness in my practice? You know? And a lot of the times we're very, very tempted to think that settledness means that I'm like clearing my thoughts, or like I'm kind of dropping into this like vroom, this kind of like vacuous like vroom state. I don't know. I think if you're in a vacuous vroom state, that might not be the greatest thing. You know, it's not really what we're about. And I'm sorry to say that, because a lot of times we come into this and we want our thoughts taken away. You know, what can I do so that it doesn't feel like this, so that I'm not thinking about these things? What can I do so that I can kind of transcend the felt experience of my daily life? And Zen just kind of like, that ain't it. That's not the question. That's not the agenda. And I'm sorry to disappoint you. You know? But so what is it? It's something better, I think. What we have to offer is better than what you came for, you know. But the path there isn't as entertaining as we thought it was going to be, you know. Isn't as immediately gratifying as we thought it was going to be. So I have a big gay flag in front of my house. We have a little, you know, when we bought the house, it had a little flagpole on it. Probably for years and years had an American flag, and we put a big gay flag. And once the flag was there, when I'm sitting in the living room, I keep out of my peripheral vision being like, there's somebody at the door. You know, over and over, just, oh, my partner's home. Oh, the mailman's here. And you know, I keep thinking that there's somebody at the door. And there's not somebody at the door. There's just a flag there. But as soon as I see that movement, my mind immediately creates a reality from my side, based on, you know, my previous beginningless causes and conditions, beginningless karma, as we say. That's what it's like for us with this idea that meditation is supposed to feel away. You know, we can hear these teachings. You know, most decent Zen teachers in our tradition are going to sit up here and be like, this is not about stopping thoughts. This is not about clearing your mind. And then when people come to the interview room and they're like, I can't stop my thoughts. Like, yeah, that's not what we're doing, you know. And it's not like it's not like a beginner problem. It's like, you know, we want to feel better, you know. And the things that are troubling us are the things that are arising. And I remember I was well into, you know, I was already sewing my brown robe for Dharma transmission. And I went to do a sesshin with a pretty popular Rinzai teacher named Shodo Harada. And I went to his monastery in Whidbey Island, which is one of those islands out northwest of Seattle. You have to take a little ferry, and there's clam chowder on the ferry. I thought I knew what he wanted. You know, he had this, you know, his monastery is kind of considered like a gnarly, kind of like, you know, robust, macho kind of like rah-rah training monastery. So they do a week of sesshin, and then like a week off, and then a 3-day sesshin, and then a week off, and then a week of sesshin, and then a week off. And then these sesshins are starting at like 3 a.m. with like an hour and a half on morning service. And everybody sleeps in the meditation hall. So you sleep where you sit. And so I went and did sesshin with them, and Rinzai tradition is a little bit like break through your delusion, there's a little bit of that spirit to it. So I thought I knew what he wanted. I was going there and I wanted him to, I wanted to be approved of, I wanted him to know I'm smart, I wanted him to know I'm a good student, And so I go in for Dokusan, they call it Sanzen sometimes in the Koan traditions. And I go in and he's like, how is the flavor of sesshin? And I say something like, I'm not trying hard enough. I need to try harder. And he's like, that's not what we're doing. Even the Rinzai teacher of the most hard-ass monastery in Japan is like, it's not about trying harder. So what's it about? I think we kind of think that a good life is a series of good experiences. We kind of check in. We kind of like, I think that if I have a collection of good experiences, then at the end of life, I'm going to feel like it was good. And so we kind of move through space trying to collect good experiences. I don't know if you ever had this. You ever have like free time or like a weekend day or something like that, and there's almost like anxiety about how you're going to do it right, how you're going to do it good. Whenever I go from point A to point B, I'm sitting in the car and I spend like 7 minutes be like, what's the right music to listen to for this drive so that I can have the richest experience possible? Because if I listen to the wrong thing, I'm going to have a bad life, and if I listen to the right thing, I'm going to have a good life. And when I used to live in New Orleans has this kind of it's like a country unto itself. There's music in New Orleans that people only in New Orleans listen to, And there's a popular song in New Orleans that is marginally popular outside of New Orleans, and it's called Check Your Bucket. Has anybody ever heard Check Your Bucket? And it's about checking your love bucket. The bucket that you're filling with love. And it's like, does your bucket have a hole in it? And that's like the chorus of the song. It's like, does your bucket have a hole in it? And the bucket of the self, where we're trying to store and collect all of our positive experiences, there's never been a bottom. That's why it's never paid off. The things that we've been trying to collect, they fall right through. How many of you have gotten something you wanted? How long did it deliver on the way that we intended for it to deliver? And so there's a way that our brain works, there's a way that our brain interacts, there's a way that our heart interacts with the world that has a certain logic to it. It's not broken. We're not poorly functioning machines. In fact, in the modern world, those of us with the most problems historically would have been the best functioning machines. Because everything that's habitual, all the ways that our habit energy overpowers our logic, that's good hard wiring for survival. Every addiction that you have that you've ever had, or what anyone has, or every difficulty that you have sticking to what you said you were going to do, or eating what you thought you wanted to eat instead of what you can't help but eat. React the way you can't help but react. All of that is good hard wiring for survival. It is a sane and natural reaction and evolution. And the problem is that it is not in the environment it was designed for. The modern world is not the environment that the machine of the human being was designed for. And there's no accident that all of these yogic and meditative traditions arose at the time when people were shifting from hunter-gatherer societies to agrarian, urban, and commerce-based societies. You have a grain surplus. You have cities, which were quite literally a shitty place to live 2,500 years ago. So there's this response, like, what are we going to do about the mismatch here? About everything that's made our lineage survive, not making a happy life in the new environment of the way civilization is unfolding. You know? Well, let's do something deliberate. Let's do something psychophysical to uncover a path to satisfaction in life as it is now. So all of the yogas, which Buddhism is one of, are these psychophysical practices of learning how to align ourselves with what makes a good life in the modern world. One approach is to pretend like you're not in the modern world. You know? That has limiting functionality. It can be a bit lonely. You know? It can be pretty isolating. And there's a way that in the Bodhisattva path, we actually want to be where everyone is. You know, so that we're relevant. You know, and so that the learning of our hearts is congruent with the world that we exist in our siblings in this world. You know, so I'm not a big fan of pretending like modernity didn't exist, doesn't exist. You know, and however, at the same time, there's choicefulness that we can have, and so we're trying to maximize our choicefulness. Okay. So that was a bit of setting up the stage, but what is this GGUZMI, this self-receiving and employing samadhi? If the bucket's got a hole in it, then it's not about what's passing through it. What's passing through it is secondary. You know? So in our tradition, we're like, so what's this bucket? You know? So when we're sitting zazen, the bucket is the field in which notions arise, is the field in which experiences arise, is the field in which emotions abide and arise and cease. You know, the field. What's the field? You know? So if you sit meditation and you say, well, I was doing all kinds of thinking, so that was bad. The field was there. You wouldn't have had the thinking if the field wasn't there. We're trying to pick up the scent of the ground of our awareness, the most fundamental aspect of our minds. Because if anything's going to be rewarding, it's not going to be all the things moving through. What's going to be rewarding is the connection that we have with the fundamental experience of our existence. So we're trying to develop a love affair with the felt experience of being alive at its most fundamental level. You know, usually we're relating to all of the weather system, you know, but in our tradition, the weather system is going to be the weather system, but we're interested in the atmosphere itself. You know? So I described this the other day as like going to the movies and trying to see the light. You know, there's the light in the projector, however many lumens or whatever. And I'm going to the movies and like, what did you watch? I'm watching the luminosity. You know, whenever you're at the movies, the most fundamental thing that you're watching is the luminosity. You know, and it manifests in all these various ways. Yeah. So what's the screen and what's the light? The screen is the body, the light is the mind. So if you're sitting there and you're feeling frustrated about the churning of notions, you know, what Uchiyama Roshi says is opening the hand of thought. You know, we're constricting around the notions, taking them at face value. What is it to divest of our interests in the particularities and lean into a curiosity and enthusiasm for what's that river that's running beneath that, making all of that possible? What's the river of experience? You know, what's the luminous nature of awareness that creates the possibility for any possible notion, any possible emotion, any possible narrative. You know? What's the page that the book of your life is written on? So our ways, in Tibetan, they don't, this word Buddhist and Buddhism are Eurocentric. That's a European way of describing things, isms, and ist, In Tibetan, the word for Buddhist, if you're a practitioner, the actual literal word is inner being, or an insight person. It's like my okayness is with me. It's portable. It is here. And I've never been without it. So this jiyu zamai, self-receiving and employing, the stability that you want arises from within. The stability that you want is received from within. The self employs the stability, and the self receives the stability. The self receives stability, and the self employs stability. So not only is it an enclosed cycle within the being of yourself, it's also a cycle between you and all things. The samadhi arises within, and it's shared, and then in the text says, and that reverberates back to you. So this is when in Dogen in this text, you remember that part where it's like earth, grass, trees, walls, tiles, pebbles, engage in Buddha activity. Because as soon as you're living from the felt experience of that fundamental nature of mind, all things come alive. Because we're adding vividness to life as it is. This enlightenment that we're talking about, it's not a state. It's the reality of things. The self is just the self. This life is just this life. It's got all kinds of different content. It's got all kinds of different feelings. It's got all kinds of relationships. It's got disappointments. And in our tradition, we're not prioritizing good experiences over bad experience. We're prioritizing the vivid engagement with what's arising. So there's one of the first Zen texts is a poem called Faith in Mind, or Trust in Mind. And the very first line is, the great way is not difficult for those who are unattached to their preferences, or the great way is not difficult, just save the picking and choosing. Sometimes we hear that and we think, oh, we can't prefer the French fries over the salad, or something like that. Or I can't want to be treated nicely rather than treated poorly. Or I can't want a roof over my head versus not a roof over my head. Or I can't want a truck rather than a car, or a car rather than a truck. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about when you're sitting zazen and you're thinking, I'm being bad. That's what we're talking about. That's not possible. Because what we're trying to do is to give life to our life situation, be present to what's arising. Yesterday, and to trust that transforms. It doesn't transform in the way that we're used to. It's not no pain, no gain. It's not exerting, hard effort into kind of molding something from raw material into something else. It's not necessarily a self-improvement regimen. The idea is that as you align with this fundamental nature of mind, then that in itself is going to naturally be transformation. So it's kind of like cooking rice and just leave it alone. Know that the flame is on. The flame of awareness is on. We did a session at Hokkyoji the other day, and I was talking about someone that has only done rice cookers, and I'm like, oh, here's how you cook rice on a stove. 1 part grain, 2 parts water, put a little salt in, put the lid on. Once you put the lid on, that lid is not coming off. Turn it all the way up. As soon as you see steam, turn it down. As low as it can go without going out. If it's white rice, it's 25 minutes. If brown rice, it's 50 minutes. Set a timer. You're done. And then I walk by, and the lid's off, and the person's stirring the pot. I'm like, what are you doing? That's how you get to Gumtown. You know? Just have faith. We know how this works. There's 2,500 years. If you show up for your life, you're going to align with what's fulfilling. And if you start to relax that calculation and manipulation that we're always trying to do to have the best possible experience. Best possible experience is the one that you're there for. So yesterday, I followed my own rules about making rice. And I did 1 part grain and 2 parts water, which is the golden rule. And then I opened the pot, and it was cereal. It was like porridge, because it was brown basmati rice. It wasn't short grain brown rice, so that has a different ratio. Should maybe be 1.5 parts water. So my first thought was, oh no, I did bad, you know? And I did bad, and everybody's gonna know I'm bad. You know, can you relate to that? I did bad. If my currency in the world is that I know about Buddhism and I know how to cook. You know, that's my personality. You know? And so I cooked poorly. You know, and I came into this weekend being like, they don't have a tenzo, I'm going to be the teacher and the doan and the tenzo. Wait till they get a load of me. You know? And then I made the rice porridge, so I'm like, well, the menu says brown basmati rice. There's a little space to the right of it. Let's see if I can squeeze the word porridge in there. And so people come in and the menu says brown, rice porridge. You get the truth. You know? That's what it's like. We want things to come out the way that we want them to come out, and sometimes they don't despite our best efforts, and then we adjust. Be like, hey, I'm sorry, I tried to make this, it came out like this. You know? I'm no good, they're going to think ill of me, I really failed, that's extra. Yeah? Just to be honest, you know, I made porridge, and that's true. That's the reality of life as it is. If you're sitting zazen and there's incessant thinking, that's the reality of life as it is. Oh, but I wish it was like this. Yeah, wishing it was different is also the reality of life as it is. Can't go wrong. You know? We're making a self is just shadow boxing. So the koan of practice, the conundrum that we're doing when we're doing the zazen thing, is to sit upright and feel what it's like to exist. And if you can't bear it, try to bear that. You know? And don't look forward to having it figured out. You know? Enjoy it. Once you have it figured out, it's all dead. You know? This isn't a painting to look at. This is a room that we're walking through. You know, when you read that text, you're like, what the hell does any of this mean? Great. You have something to explore. You know? Life's just a road trip to death. You know? Are you going to spend the whole thing stressed out if we're going to get there on time? You know? I don't have a clock. I feel satisfied with what I've shared. Oh, wow, that was long, huh?
No,
Okay.
it started 10 till.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do we have Q&A time? Okay. Does anybody have any reflections, questions? Yeah.
Can you speak a little more about the move from hunter-gatherer to agrarian, how that kind of, how we're not built for that transition?
Yeah. Imagine being programmed to maximize your safety by identifying and acquiring opportunity and sustenance and identifying and removing yourself or having an aversion to danger. Okay? Now, create endless opportunity for sustenance, endless opportunity for pleasurable experiences, and remove a considerable amount of danger. So then what happens? Just like, really prioritizing the brilliant, smart, well-worn thing of really prioritizing fats and sugars and carbohydrates, to our detriment, which actually at a certain point it starts to like release toxins in our bodies, and it was what kept us alive. It's not fair, because I come from a chubby lineage, and skinny people are always kind of wagging their fingers. You have no self-discipline. And I'm like, if this were 2,000 years ago, you'd be dead. I'd be I'm the smart one, but it depends on the environment, And then if you remove, the imminent danger or the, infant mortality rates, like all the things that were problems, and you replace it with, did I talk too much? Was I weird? Does this shirt go with these pants? I don't know. I thought so and so would have appreciated me more. All of the energy that went to survival is now going into that. And so in both directions, in terms of attachment and aversion, it's really, really exaggerated. So the definition in Buddhism is attachment is exaggerating the positive qualities of an object, thinking that proximity to it or acquisition of it is going to cause enduring happiness. And aversion is exaggerating the negative qualities of an object, thinking that separation from it or destruction of it is going to cause enduring happiness. And Buddha's saying is like, neither of those things do. Once your basic needs are met, everything else becomes a little bit toxic. But we're still manipulating as if we're trying to survive, and we're not. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I've got one.
Yeah.
Well, first a comment. The food was really good.
Okay, good.
Across the board. The other one was, you said this. One strategy is you could pretend like the modern world doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think for a good amount of my early days of training in our tradition, I lived at Tassajara, and it was kind of like this little fetish. I got to live this little cosplay. I didn't have electric light in my room, and I wore medieval clothes, and we followed a schedule, and we chanted. We did everything the way that they've been doing in Japan for theoretically 100 years, but actually it's only the way they've been doing it in Japan for maybe 100 years. And I had this sense that I've cracked the code because I left society. And that was the early model of the Shramana tradition, the yogic traditions, these strivers, these rishis, these forest ascetics, It's like they left society. Part of the Mahayana tradition is like, what about society? So we're not abandoning our life situation. We're embracing our life situation and being alive in it. But then on the same vein, you could say that and you could be like, well, then by that logic, I should probably have an X account, and I should probably have a Instagram, and I should probably make a website, and I should probably try to have a Patreon so I can get paid for my Dharma talks, and then I get popular, and so they always talk about, Buddhism integrates with the culture that it comes into, and in China it integrated with Taoism and Confucianism, and it integrated with Shinto, and it integrated with Bon and shamanism in Tibet and stuff. And then when it comes to the US, what does it integrate with? Capitalism, which is the enemy of liberation. Holding food for ransom. Maximizing profits at all costs. Training the mind to believe that increased acquisition will cause increased happiness. They can't coexist. So I'm not saying to not develop discernment about what makes you happy and what doesn't make you happy, or what makes the mind feel easeful in the life that you're in. Go on retreat, but stay engaged. Stay engaged civically, stay engaged politically, stay engaged in communities, care for each other. Because, I don't know, I think the Hermit on the Mountain is kind of useless. Our practice is not to entertain yourself. It's not even really about having a nice time. But it's about bringing your life to life so that you get full treatment. So that the heart's exposed to everything it has to offer, which is sympathy, compassion, and the singing grasses. Does that feel sufficient? Okay. Yeah.
My question was, when you talk about connecting with the fundamental nature of our existence, what can we do in daily life to turn that into a more concrete idea?
Yeah.
It seems abstract.
Yeah. So I mean, I forget what. There's some text that we recite at a certain point that says, in the Jukai ceremony, when someone takes a precept, we say the meaning is in the living it, and so the experience is in the application. So when we talk about practicing, when we come into a place like this, we're rehearsing. This room is like a batting cage, and you're learning how to do the thing of being in the body without calculation, to being a vibrating, receptive being, to put some time aside to minimize distractions and just feel into doing that. And then once you've done that, you do some retreats. You come here, once in a while, and then you start to get a little bit of a taste for it. And then you're standing on the street corner waiting for the light to change, and you notice that you aren't there, and then you breathe in through you lift the crown of the head towards the heavens. You breathe in through the nostrils, send the body low below the navel, and then you've turned on your existence again. Now, there's a saying in Japanese where they say, first the person drinks sake, then sake drinks sake, and then sake drinks the person. And so in our path, it's like, first you practice Zazen, then Zazen practices Zazen, then Zazen makes the person that is you. It's born out of the being of stillness. Okay? So the short answer is just keep rehearsing, just keep trying, and to really scan yourself, body and mind, for constriction. If you're tensing around ideas, if you're tensing around things, to just relinquish it. This practice has very little to do with what you're thinking. It's about holding the breathing body of the heart open and loving that. And if we can't love that, love that. Okay, are we satisfied?